Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Uptime Podcast. Really busy episode. We have a discussion on the Manchin-Schumer Inflation Reduction Act and what that's likely to do for renewable energy. We talk about a company that's developing a 15 megawatt rare earth free offshore wind turbine generator and the implications for that in the future. And then we deep dive, in a sense, with the metals company who is trying to pull metals from the ocean floor and why we need to go do that and what the complications and environmental impact of that going to be. At the end of this, we have an interview with Josh Rangel, President and CEO of Rangel Renewables based in Houston, Texas. They're a big O&M wind turbine maintenance company. They're busy right now going around the Midwest replacing blades and fixing up wind turbines and doing repowering projects. So it's a great interview with Josh, so stay tuned. It's going to be an excellent episode. So the Manchin-Schumer administration is putting together a bill that it's supposedly going to pass through Congress, and it's called the Inflation Reduction Act. I think the first response from everybody in America is like, yeah, right. Okay, so Rosemary, you don't even know about inflation in Australia, do you? Because here in America, we are like at 8%, 9% inflation rate.
We're talking about it a lot too.
So are you? We could send you some of our inflation if you'd like. We'd be glad to do that.
Pretty cool with it not going higher. Thanks anyway.
So well, don't say Americans aren't generous. So the deal is there's a broad mix of, so pretty much anything you could think of is in this bill. It's the craziest thing. It's like 700 pages long. I was scanning through it over the weekend thinking, my God, who can put all this together? But let me give you a summary of all the things that are inside of it. Basically, it's going to have include tax rebates or production tax credits, what it sounds like, for wind and solar, and then eventually bring in storage, battery storage as part of it. Green hydrogen is part of this mix where they're going to give tax incentives to create green hydrogen that is not created by natural gas. So, but you're allowed to create some CO2 when you create this green hydrogen. There's a graduated scale there. I don't know whoever came up with that. They're also going to open up some oil sites in the Gulf of Mexico for drilling that the administration has said they weren't going to close, but were closed. Now they're going to open them back up again. So there's a weird mix. Now, the goal for all this is to get to 40% emissions reductions by 2030, and that 40% is based on 2005 emission levels. So the people who are in the know, looking at what the emissions are going to be based on this bill, or this proposed bill, think they're going to get to still 40% reduction, which I think is amazing. And part of this conglomeration of items, so there's different taxes going to be applied, there's tax rebates being applied, but it's now broadening the scope of renewables. It's very similar, I thought, to what's happening in the EU, where not that natural gas is clean, but nuclear is coming back into the fold. Batteries are coming into the fold. Green hydrogen is coming into the fold, which they haven't been in the last couple of years. So my questions to everybody here is, one, do we really think we're going to get to a 40% reduction in emissions if we're drilling and still using petroleum-based products? Two, there's a big push on offshore wind. Is it now? It just seems like the golden child is offshore wind and maybe offshore solar. We'll talk about that in a little while. Is that where America's future is, in offshore wind and drilling off the shorelines, especially in the Gulf of Mexico? Is that where we're going?
Oh, some of those things are on the way. I really have a tough time believing in this. The quote, probably cut emissions to roughly 40% below peak U.S. emissions. there's a lot of marketing speak in those numbers and the way they're presented. To reduce to 40% by the things that this bill is saying, it's more than a long shot. I believe you might see a 10% reduction, and of course that's an uneducated number, but you would have to have sweeping change in the way that our culture in general digests energy to have a 40% below cut. I mean, right. Rosemary, maybe you can speak to what you think about that 40% number.
Yeah, I haven't dived too deeply into it because it's not my country, I guess. But I have been on Twitter a lot. And one really annoying thing about this bill is they're calling it IRA. And it's like, no, that acronym is already taken. That means something. So you keep on thinking that, like there's trouble in Ireland again. And so maybe you guys are American, so maybe you can sort that out for me, please, because it's it's irritating. But I will say that I follow a bunch of climate interested people, climate activists, both on the engineering side, the science side, and some other kind of third side. And they're always incredibly cynical about every political thing that happens. Is the general vibe on climate change Twitter, let's call it. And they're not about this. People seem genuinely excited about this as being the first real thing that America has done, the first real chance that America has to, reduce a big chunk of emissions quickly. So, I've kind of dodged out of giving my opinion, but my general sense from the community is that people think finally this is something real. And I think the bipartisanship of it is one big thing as well.
I doubt they're going to get that. I don't think they're going to get bipartisanship in it at all. I think what's going to happen is the Republicans are not going to vote for it. The person you're talking about is Joe Manchin, who is essentially the president of the United States in most matters at this point. So Joe Manchin is from West Virginia, and it's a coal state. It has been historically a coal state. And so when he's sort of the deciding vote for most all bills. So if the Democrats want to pass something, they need Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who's from Arizona, to agree to it. They're the two. I don't know, what do you call them, Joel? They're like the Mustangs, the renegades of the Democratic Party.
So you mean
they need those two votes.
They're Republicans, but they're not like leading the party or anything. 50. It's just a couple of votes that the Democrats know that they can sometimes convince over.
Everybody here is a Democrat. Everybody here is a Democrat. They have 50 Democrats. You have 50 Republicans in the Senate, so they're split 50-50. The deciding vote is the Vice President of the United States, who happens to be a Democrat. So if they can get all 50 Democrats to vote for this bill or to get it through, there's some procedural things that have to happen. The vice president will cast the deciding vote, which will be a Democratic vote. Therefore, it'll be 51-50 and it'll pass. That's the process they're in, because I don't think any Republican's going to vote for it now. That's what.
So you're saying that Democrats have to convince other Democrats to do anything at all when that's their whole platform?
Think of Manchin as like a centric Democrat, where he's like right in the middle, where he might go either way, but he's kind of leaning towards the Democrat side. So right now they just have to convince him, and then they have the 50-50 is the way I would look at it.
Right. Or 51-50.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 51 with the VP. So but the House now, so there's the Senate and the House.
Right.
House is completely different because the House has 472 members, I think it is, something of that sort. 435.
435.
Alan's paid more attention to civics class than I did, and that goes by the population of states and different things where they can have their electoral delegates and whatnot. So that they're two separate bodies, but they have to be sanctioned or not sanctioned, but a bill has to be passed by both of them, and then it goes to this. So it's passed the House because the House is Democrat majority by far. And then it's on to the Senate, and then they have to ratify it. Once they do, then it can get signed into law. There's a lot of stuff in this bill, like, even down to reviving some old tax benefits. Buy an EV. If you're in a certain tax bracket, you can get a $4,500 rebate or a $7,500 rebate. That stuff is cool, but I think the thing that pertains to the three of us and our general focus usually is reviving the production tax credits in the U.S., because where I sit in the industry, I try to communicate through a lot of people about production tax credits. What does your business model look without them? What does it look with them? And now, if this gets passed, you're going to see a massive push of new installations. And new installations drives, hopefully, we've been talking in the last few months about some of these, a nacelle facility and a blade manufacturing facility shutting down. If PTC stuff comes back up and all of a sudden the orders start flowing because now people can get production tax credits when they build new, you might see some of those things open back up. And that's how this ideas work, right? Once we put the incentive back into the market, then we start up some manufacturing facilities. Now we've created some jobs. I can speak clearly from at least 2 examples I know where I've had clients tell me, like, we're just going to sit on this project and wait until we see what PTC happens. If PTC gets passed, because last November that was the big push in I think it wasn't the Build Back Better bill. There was another one. Either way, it didn't make it. And it was, everybody was kind of waited on bated breath, like looking at, is PTC going to go? If this thing goes, you're going to see wind domestic onshore in the U.S. wind development spur back up. You're going to see it kick off. You're going to see demand for cranes. You're going to see it. I believe so.
Well, yeah, that's one of the parts of the bill where they're really trying to push the domestic content of wind turbines. And there's not a lot of offshore wind. There's not a lot of wind turbine components, finished components that are shipped to the United States, maybe except from Mexico. Well, I guess Canada doesn't count either. So from Canada and Mexico is probably where most of those components come from. And they are trying to source them in the United States, but they won't be run by United States companies for the most part. They can be run by companies that are based in Denmark
But at least it's creating some jobs, right? You're bringing some jobs back to these communities. So that's great. True.
That's good. It's just we're in this really weird cycle like we've been talking about where all those factories have closed. Now they have to start them back up again. It's not the ideal situation. So there's more to come, and who even knows this is going to pass. Right? It's probably going to get altered by the time it finally gets to the president's desk. So there's more to come.
Get the latest on wind industry news, business, and technology sent straight to you every week. Sign up for the Uptime Tech newsletter at weatherguardwind.com/news.
GreenSpur Wind, which is a UK-based generator developer, is working with Niron Magnetics, which is a Minnesota-based company, to create a rare earth-free permanent magnet generator. And they've been working on this for a number of years, and earlier versions of this were just essentially too heavy. So think of a direct drive generator. It's basically permanent magnets and coils of wire, and bang, you're making electricity. But the big problem, obviously, everybody's worried about rare earth minerals coming from China and Australia and other places where they're really difficult to get their hands on. And the United States and Europe don't want to do that anymore, and they're trying to develop their own sources. So you have to think about making generators in a completely different way. So the way that GreenSpur is thinking about a generator is the opposite of every electrical engineering cell in my body. So the way that magnetics work in a motor, everything's kind of rotary. Everything's spinning around. What GreenSpur is doing is moving the magnetic fields actually along the is that right? So they're moving radial flux generators to basically a completely new setup. So they have now designed a 15 megawatt generator, and I think 15 megawatts, it screams Vestas, and it screams Siemens, it screams GE, and they have, or I guess they're still trying to make a deal with one of the OEMs on this direct drive generator, but their big problem is weight. They're just trying to drive the weight down. Now, it sounds like at the moment they were able to reduce the weight by like 50% or so. And instead of using steel and copper and other things, they're using aluminum, which is just lighter weight. So they're really trying to hone this design. And I guess my question is, are we really that concerned a design like this, a relatively new way of making electricity in a generator, we're going to move to something like this? Or it just doesn't, like in the recent bill that's going through Congress, rare earths are rare earths. I think there's still a feeling like we're going to be able to get our hands on some, but maybe not. And what do you do? If you can't, what do? You have to change the way you make generators. So is things like GreenSpur and Niron Magnetics, which is based near the University of Minnesota, are they the future? And they have patents around this too, I assume. So that means you have to pay them for the patent and buy the motors from them. It's just a very odd setup. I mean, the technology sounds cool, but is this the way we're going to go?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a variety of options. So rare earths are a supply chain problem at the moment. They're an environmental problem at the moment. And there is definitely plenty of people, companies working on ways to address that. So, you've got projects, I think mothballed projects in the US that are opening up again, and new mines coming online, and same in Australia, because rare earths aren't rare despite the name. They're everywhere. The issue is that processing them is hard because they come in really low concentrations and they tend to be co-located with some nasty stuff. So, they do nearly all of the rare earth mining happens in China at the moment, and they're just incredibly problematic from an environmental and health perspective. You end up with, radioactive tailings that are, causing local riverways to become radioactive, and, huge health problems for people that live in those areas. And that's the main reason why countries other than China have been kind of pretty content to sit back and let China supply these cheap rare earths. Not that other countries couldn't be mining and processing our own rare earths. It's that we don't want the environmental impacts of that, or we don't want the cost to make sure we don't get those environmental impacts. So that's one route to go down, is to just get better and cheaper at processing these minerals in a less environmentally destructive way. Because, I mean, Australia and the US and other countries, probably even China now, I think, is starting to feel like it's not worth the trade-off, to get the economic benefit, but the environmental and health impacts. So that's kind of like one branch. And then the second branch is to reduce the use of rare earths. And I don't think that there's anything that we make with rare earths that absolutely needs rare earths. I think there's always a different way. And I know we were talking earlier about I was reminiscing about my high school physics class, where I remember we all hand wound electromagnets, right? You get some copper wire and you wind it around. And I remember my dad had a woodworking lathe in the workshop, so I was able to leave my project to the night before and still get it all done, because I just kind of wound it all on the lathe. And it worked really well too. So we all know how to make a magnet without rare earths in it, but it's just a matter of optimizing the overall cost. The rare earths make really strong magnets, which means that you can make things smaller, which means you use less materials, which yes means lower weight, but usually low weight is also associated with low cost, because you just use less stuff. So
is it the weight, Rosemary? Is it the weight that's a driver? Or are they concerned about the weight on top of the tower? Is that one of the design constraints?
Yeah, they are. And I mean, if you look at the difference between a direct drive generator and a gearbox generator, then the direct drive ones are huge, right? You can easily pick, like the Enercon onshore wind turbines use direct drive, and pretty much everyone else uses gearbox. And that's why they had those huge eggs for a while around the nacelle, because it's just like a really large diameter component that needs to fit in there. So you can imagine that there is some pressure to make that smaller. It's a big weight sitting on top of like a really tall, skinny tower. And it starts oscillating, and it causes problems for the tower and the foundation if you have the bigger the weight is. In generally, you want everything to be light, and maybe the generator weight isn't the most important weight on a wind turbine. Probably the blade weight is more important, but it's certainly not irrelevant. But also, just if you've got to make it huge, then there's a lot of material in that, and so overall, it's a good cost optimization where you're adding material to actually just make the physical size of the generator, and you're adding material to the tower to make it strong enough to hold this big mass. All of those things. So I think that definitely we already have have some solutions to the rare earths problem, but it's really great if we have another solution that lets us make stuff that's more like what we have now, which works really well, and also doesn't use rare earths. So I don't know how promising this specific technology is, and they say 56% mass reduction, but they don't say what relative to. I don't know if that's relative to their first
to the
design
earlier design, which is first design, which is too heavy. They got told it was too heavy. Yes.
Yeah, but what's that got to do? Like, is it lighter now than a rare earth using generator? I'd be surprised.
It seems like it's more in line with the rare earth generator than it was in the past. It seemed like it was. They were told by OEMs, "Hey, this is too heavy. We're not going to deal with it." So they had to reduce the weight. Yeah. They cut it in half by using just basically a different design and a lot of lighter materials like aluminum.
Yeah, and then it will depend on how much cost they added for doing that light weighting. If you can make something half the weight, but now you're using unobtainium to make it, then that isn't necessarily going to be a more appealing prospect
but
to
it,
an OEM.
In comparison, it's in comparison to what though? It's in comparison to not having rare earths, and the price of a generator just tripled, right? So because the mining of rare earth in America is so expensive.
Yeah,
aren't they just, it's a comparison is, it's a matter of time, right? If I'm GreenSpur, I'm just waiting it out because it'll come.
Yeah,
the business will come to me eventually.
See if their technology works. See if rare earths turn out to be the big problem everyone thinks. And we see battles like this happening all over the clean tech space. It's also happening with battery chemistries. Like people are developing lithium alternatives on the expectation that lithium will get prohibitively expensive, but it may not. It may not. And I think we need all of these. It's capitalism, right? You need all of these competing things, and then survival of the fittest. We just don't know yet what natural selection is going to favor yet, because we have to wait for all these commodity things to play out. So I definitely am pleased that there's research like this happening. But I wouldn't necessarily place a large bet on this specific company.
Thinking here about 15 megawatt offshore generators, there's not going to be that many of them installed in the world, right? If there's, in the next 10 years, if there's 5,000 of them installed, 10,000 of them installed, that's 5 or 10,000 units. Wow, that's a great influx of cash for GreenSpur if they were all the GreenSpur designs. That's one thing. But I think what I like to see here is that this technology is being explored and investigated because every new EV that hits the street has basically a backwards generator in it as well. So as our society starts to electrify itself more, having more options for different kinds of electric motors is only good for, like Rosemary said, for the capitalistic idea of how we get things done.
Yeah, your world changes if you don't have rare earth permanent magnets. It changes a lot. It's hard to think about that. I think most people on the street wouldn't even consider that, but your life would change dramatically without those. For sure. I'll
give you a life-changing moment that I had with an N52 neodymium magnet. It was actually 2 of them. And I was doing the same experiment Rosemary does, but trying to make an omnidirectional power generator. And I had 2 of them separated on my desk by about 4 feet in little holders. They were 1.5 inches in diameter balls. And I happened to bump one of them with my elbow. And what ended up happening was I ended up like this with like right here, an N52 here and an N52 here. And it cracked my finger. I ended up I was like this, taped up in a splint for like 3 weeks after that because it broke my finger. So lesson learned.
Explain that to your mom.
Don't play
those
with.
Things are strong.
Don't play with N52 neodymium magnets.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, that one's gonna be hard to explain.
Yeah, that wasn't good.
I can make it up a lot. Like I got into a bar fight or I crashed my motorcycle.
Yeah. Playing with magnets.
Sound cool.
Playing with magnets on my desktop.
Magnets.
Physics is cool, Alan. Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about.
Have you met a physicist lately?
Yeah.
Ouch.
Just saying, engineers are cooler than physicists, and we know where engineers rank in the cool spectrum. They're way down at the bottom.
At the top, right?
Have you seen the Big Bang Theory? You're opposite.
The metals company is looking to mine the seabed floor of the Pacific Ocean. So Rosemary, roughly halfway between the United States and Australia, if you draw a line between the two, there is this area of where tectonic plates are, and there's like volcanoes on the bottom of the ocean, and they're spewing out these minerals, and they spew them out as like these rocks, these mineral filled rocks that then fall to the ocean floor. Well, evidently somebody a long time ago stumbled across these things and realized, hey, they're full of some really nice metals. There's nickel, there's cobalt, manganese, and copper in these rocks. And they're just sitting on the ocean floor. They don't even call them rocks. They call them nodules. So the metals company is proposing to drop what I would term underwater drones down to the bottom of the ocean floor and pick these things up. And they're not attached to anything. They're just rocks just sitting on the bottom of the ocean. But there are so many deposits down there that it's a major, I guess it'd be a major find. The whole region is like 4,500 miles long. It's huge. But the question right now, Joel, and you can explain some of the details, is they're not so concerned about how they're going to pick these nodules off the floor. The question is, well, are they going to be allowed to?
Yeah, so you have that Clarion-Clipperton zone. Nobody owns it. Right? It's in the middle of nowhere. It's not in any country's exclusive economic zone. So there's no like governing body over the top of the thing. So the people that are out there right now, and it's because it's such a large region, there's many different corporations backed, a lot of them backed by state governments or federal, not state, but backed by governments, or in like joint venture with governments that are staking claim to some of these areas, because they believe this stuff is there. So what they really want to make sure they do right for the highly visible ones is they want to make sure that they're, as you think, it's just this 4,500 miles of silty seafloor at 4,000 to 5,000 meters deep. So for our non-metric speaking people, that's 3 miles. Tip it this way: if you're driving 60 miles an hour, it takes you 3 minutes to drive straight to the bottom. That's how far it is. You would think that there's nothing really that you're going to harm down there, but they want to make sure that we don't mess up an ecosystem, because all ecosystems are tied together and in some form or another. So we don't want to go messing up one that could possibly, maybe we do that and oxygen stops. I don't know. But neither does anybody else. So right now they're in the midst of, or they have been for a few years, trying to do a lot of environmental assessments, with the machines that they have going down. Basically, think a Roomba that goes around your living room, but with a hose on it that goes 3 miles up to the sea, or the surface of the sea, and trying to suck these things up and then shoot them up to the surface and then deposit them on a boat. That's the idea. So understanding what it looks like when they pull the sediment up and they call them polyatomic nodules. When they pull those out of the sediment, what does the plume look like behind? Are we actually affecting anything? Is there some kind of, rare sea creature that we're going to, kick out of their home if we do this? A lot of those things floating around right now, but there's been some money shoved into it. The metals company used to be known as Deep Green. They went through an SPAC, as we call them here in the States, with a special purpose acquisition to get listed on the stock market, and now they're called the Metals Company. So they're trying to gather some capital to go and do this. There was a really cool 60 Minutes episode, if you're a fan of the riveting tech TV that 60 Minutes can be, all about this stuff. But there's a long ways to go, but they believe that this could get rid of some of the human rights violations and cobalt mining in Africa, and the intense need, like Rosemary is saying, of mining some of these rare earth materials and processing them in China. If you look at a picture of one of these polyatomic nodules, they're like potatoes. It's basically, think of like potatoes all over the seafloor and just vacuum them up.
Yeah, they're really rich in minerals and metals. It's a very odd thing to see, and I'm not sure what the international bodies are going to do. From just going through the metals company's website, it seems like they're in a holding pattern a little bit, because when we don't know, we don't know. And so then everybody's imagination starts to run wild. It's like when we put a man on the moon and we thought we could bring back disease back to Earth. So we quarantined the astronauts for like 2 weeks until we were sure they didn't bring back a deadly disease. It's starting to feel like that again. We just don't know what's at the bottom of the ocean floor. Maybe we bring up some weird thing, or we awaken the Kraken or Godzilla or something. That's what it feels like right now. We just don't know.
The abyss. Yeah.
And
there could also be, we don't know that much about the ocean. It's the most, unexplored part of Earth, especially, when it's that deep.
Yeah.
So we don't know what we would be disturbing and what role it plays, because, just because it's out of sight, out of mind, doesn't mean that it doesn't do something important. And so, I hope that they're going to, thoroughly investigate that before disturbing it.
Give me odds. Yeah. Give me odds that they find plastic at 3 miles down at the bottom of the ocean. What are the odds, Rosemary?
Guaranteed.
100%.
It's got to be close to 100%.
Plastic's
Right?
everywhere.
Right. So at least we could do
and
is
they'll find some. Yeah, well, they can vacuum out the plastic while they're there. I guess that they will, but they'll probably find some creature that there's life there surviving in a way that we didn't think was biologically possible. They're always discovering stuff like that. Creatures that are getting their energy from not from the sun, from different sources. There might be something cool down there. There might be some process that affects above the ocean as well that actually relies on what's going down there. But
you're not going to know until you do it.
Scientists, but I hope there's a few involved.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, just a
and
little
I think
bit,
I feel
right?
this. So you should feel it too. It's like, that's how I feel about what we did with Australia, when my ancestors from England came over and just, did whatever, and then found out, it turns out that the way that the Indigenous people were managing this land was actually, the only sustainable way to do it. And we've come in and, tried to impose our English farming methods, and it lasted a few generations, and then it was run out. And same thing happened in the US. That's my understanding of what happened with that whole Dust Bowl situation, and all sorts of things like that. Examples of people not understanding, going into a new environment, changing things, and then realizing afterwards, that was a terrible idea, but you can't go backwards. So it's like, are we going to take our above water ways and go in and mess up this ecosystem that turns, or natural process that turns out to be very important to us, even above the ocean, and we won't know until we've done it, like you say. And so I think there has to be some sort of precautionary principle where you move a bit cautiously, but on the other hand, we've got urgent problems above ground as well,
right? And
if this is a solution to a big chunk of it, it would be nice to see less above ground mining for sure. I mean, I don't think anybody likes the impact of mining. We like the products of mining, and so we tolerate it. I
think you just converted yourself.
Very interesting. No, I'm on the fence. It's just one of those tricky. It's a trade off.
It's the Rosemary in comparison to what question, right? If by itself, ocean mining is horrible, but in comparison to children digging it out of the ground in remote places, ocean mining looks pretty good.
Cobalt is one of those things where there's alternatives as well, just like with the rare earths. I mean, other places have cobalt, Australia being one of them, and nearly everything that uses cobalt, there's a very similar product that doesn't use the cobalt. You don't need cobalt for batteries, for example. Plenty of batteries, lithium-ion batteries, don't have cobalt. Cobalt on its own is not. There'll be solutions to that problem without deep sea mining if we want them. But that taken as a whole, it does sound like this is a big resource. So I just hope they go carefully.
Lightning is an act of God, but lightning damage is not. Actually, it's very predictable and very preventable. Strike Tape is a lightning protection system upgrade for wind turbines made by WeatherGuard. It dramatically improves the effectiveness of the factory LPS, so you can stop worrying about lightning damage. Visit weatherguardwind.com to learn more, read a case study, and schedule a call today.
So next up, we have an interview with Josh Rangel, president of Rangel Renewables, based in Houston, Texas. It's a really fascinating interview. He talks a lot about all the different O&M projects that they're working on and their capabilities, and it's just a good conversation. So stay tuned for Josh Rangel of Rangel Renewables. Josh, thanks for being on the Uptime Podcast. And if everybody hasn't realized, Rangel Renewables is huge, right? And they're doing great work and they're expanding very rapidly. So I thought this would be a good conversation to talk to, the head of the company, Josh Rangel of Rangel Renewables, and actually hear from the head man of all the things that are happening there. And Josh, welcome to the program.
Alan, thank you for having me. I'm very excited. I very much appreciate it.
So as we all know, Rangel Renewables is a growing business and focused mainly on construction in the larger O&M efforts in wind. And I saw some things on LinkedIn from you this week, so that goes right to that point. Can you describe some of the work that Rangel Renewables excels in?
Yeah, certainly. So Rangel Renewables is a turnkey wind installation, maintenance, and heavy lift service company here in the U.S. Anywhere from pre-construction all the way to commissioning, we can certainly jump on a project and assist in up-tower support, whether it be providing labor, equipment, tools, trucks, subcontracting cranes, different things of that nature. Really can do the full scope of the work that's being asked of us.
Yeah, and you're a relatively newcomer to wind, especially since COVID. Right? So you started Rangel Renewables in 2016 and as a small startup, and now you're a large company. Actually, you have over 100 employees. Can you just give us a little bit of insight and what were those impactful moments that accelerated your business to where it is today?
Yes. So, you have those moments in time where you have to really ask yourself, are you willing to put forth all your effort and all your cards, right? Back in December of 2019, had an opportunity to assist the largest OEM, Vestas, along with a crane company. And to put it in perspective, November of 2019, we had 3 employees, myself, Aaron, which is on the podcast as well, and on their sales staff. By the middle of March of 2020, we had 103. And really, it's a true testament to the efforts and true grit of the men and women in the field making it happen, from, once again, the construction that was happening on site. So offloading, nacelle prep, blade prep, hub prep, going up tower, making sure that the support was needed up there. Then we had quality, and it also brought in safety. And so really the dynamic of a full-scale project started to be implemented on our end, and that was something that I had always preached. You go into these pitches, and you go into the meetings and the phone calls and the emails, and you're asking certain customers and clients, I'm not asking for the moon, I'm just asking for one shot. And very humbling and very blessed in that prerogative to say that I, kept knocking on the doors. It's you have to have tough skin. There's a lot of people that'll tell you no. And with the portfolio that we had at the time, I come from conventional power with combined cycle power plants. But when you're going into your own and they're asking you, well, we don't really want to know what you've done in the past with other companies. We want to know what you've done as Rangel Renewables. So building the portfolio, building the financial status to be able to hold large payrolls and be able to make sure that you can afford to pay for your equipment and your tools and your trucks and all that's gathered with it. So you really have to make sure that you also have the right structure around yourself from a manpower standpoint and management standpoint to make sure you can be a success.
Yeah, that's really important. It seems obvious at first, but it's a difficult thing to implement. And as you grew right through COVID. 2019, kind of getting your real first start. How did you manage all that through COVID? What was some of the keys there?
There was actually the week of my birthday, and I love being on site, love being with the men and women out in the field. So I had left from San Antonio, and we had a project in North Texas. Well, right as I got there, I would say 3 to 4 days later, that's when, the federal government said, all right, we're shutting everything down. Well, on a personal note, I had chronic asthma when I was a young boy. So I was like, well, I don't want to have any breathing problems because I know what that entails. But I decided to really live the life of a wind tech. I ended up staying out there several months. So it was awesome. We were running four main crane, assisting guys, being out in the field, running light plants and water buffaloes, running taglines, helping with tools. All of that really provided the experience as a new industry, upcoming business in our industry, I should say. Then it derived into, well, I had some of the biggest head honchos with the OEM at that site that really couldn't travel anywhere. So then the relationship starting to get built. Then identifying, well, who is Rangel without this crane company? Who can they become? What is it that, drives them? The vision of Rangel Renewables is to leave a legacy and be a blessing. That truly wholeheartedly is what I want to do. I know one day it will be a global entity, and I preach that with our staff. And my favorite thing to do is praying over all of our staff the first thing Monday morning in our management call, and really making sure that that is the foundation of what we do, and talk about our why is it that we do what we do, and why we wake up in the morning. I'm very blessed to be able to get up and say, all right, I'm ready to conquer the day. I don't care if it's 12 hours, 15 hours, 18 hours, and we're driving 2 hours to one site and 3 hours to another site to just go shake a hand and say hello. I'm big on making sure that they know that I'm in it for the long haul, and I'm willing to do what the techs are doing, and just leading by examples. I also had the privilege of working about the 12 months in 2020, about 9.5, close to 10 months, we worked around the clock, so day and night shift. So learning the aspects of what you can do during the day, learning the aspects of what you can do at night, and really that progression to say, hey, if there's a window that we're trying to chase and we're getting close to the end of production to where we need to go ahead and turn on or energize the towers for the owners, and at that point saying, well, maybe we start a little later and chase the wind there, or we wake up really early and chase the wind when the winds are down. So it was an awesome experience. I miss being out on the road. My staff can tell you I'd rather be out there most of the time rather than in the office. But that's just my heart. I really enjoy being hands-on and out in the field.
And now your geographic area of coverage area has grown considerably. Where are some projects taking place this year?
So we're in Iowa, Colorado. We have several projects here in Texas. We have a few bids out in Canada right now. We're trying to land some work in Puerto Rico, so we'll know by Friday, as a matter of fact. And then that's coupled with trying to get some cranes on a few sites as well.
So there's been not only in terms of employee growth, in terms of geographic coverage, you've really grown a good bit. And on the podcast, we've been discussing a lot about repowering, and I've seen you guys on LinkedIn. You do, if you haven't followed Rangel Renewables on LinkedIn, you need to do that, because Aaron does a great job. I think it's Aaron, just taking videos and snapshots and things and giving you a perspective of what's actually happening on the ground. And I appreciate that. I think everybody that follows you does too. And so repowering is becoming more and more of a thing, and particularly in the United States, as new onshore starts to slow down. It's all about repowering, keeping your stuff up and running. So from the outside looking at repowering, it seems relatively simple, but I know it's really complex and involves a lot of tasks that I'm sure you guys are really good at. Can you just highlight a couple of the sort of the complexities about repowering a site and how Rangel manages those situations?
I like to look at it from a 360 perspective. People are asking, why would you repower a site? It's old. There's, smaller towers. There's a lot more of them. You could build one tower for what, 20 years ago, 20 towers could do nowadays. So from an owner and developer standpoint, repower provides a lot of reduced cost. So you have your electrical lines, a lot of the civil work that would go into building a new farm is already there. So you want to make sure that any business, right? How can I improve my return on investment but also reducing my cost? Repowering is that portion for the developers. Now, in tangent with that, you have to make sure that all these components whether they're going to be reused. They have oil. You have to look at the environmental aspect, permitting. All those still are encompassed with the site, but because you have existing units out on site, you have to be very careful because you don't want to hit the, let's just say you're pulling the rotor, right? You don't want to have the rotor come out hot. It hits the boom on the crane, and now you're having a, all stop, and just a lot of different variables that come into play that you have to be aware of with it being a site that's still at times live, right? Let's just say there's 50 towers, 40 towers still might be online. They've shut down and lottoed out 10 of them, but you also have to double check and make sure that none of them are energized. But in people are people, right? And if there's a mistake and one's still on and they didn't realize it was still on, and then you have, technicians in a live tower, can really, your major issues can happen, right? So you just have to make sure our three mainstays are safety, quality, and production. And I want all our men and women to go home at the end of the day to their loved ones. So just making sure we double, triple check our work in that sense. But repowering back in 2020 for us was 75% of our work. So we had projects in Indiana, Minnesota, South Dakota, Texas. All those really help build to where we're at now to understand, okay, these are how some of the OEMs like to work. These are how some of the crane companies like to work. These are companies that like to just stay in this lane, and these are companies that like to stay in this lane. So from a repowering standpoint, it really has provided kind of a jump start for us because it's a niche market for some contractors, but in essence, it's given us the experience needed to continue the growth that I aspire for.
Yeah, it seems like repowering is going to be the big ticket items coming up in the next couple of years. I was just looking at some data today, actually. Like the average wind turbine age is around 7-8 years old, and usually repowering happens plus 10 years. So you're getting closer and closer. And there's a lot of farms right now that are 11, 12 years old. And we did talk about in Minnesota where they're actually shutting down wind turbines because they lost their PTC. So there's just this weird dynamic going on right now, and it seems like repowering is the thing. And how long does it usually take to repower a turbine? Is it a day-long process? Is it a week-long process? What's the sort of time frame there?
Always depends on wind, right? So really geographical location, timing of when you're going to have your components ready to go. But back to Minnesota, we had 2 projects out there. We assisted a crane company and another the OEM out there. And so that we were trying to do 2 towers a week just based off of if we had all the right tooling, did we have turning gear, where's the blade gripper. So really just depends on where we're at. But at that time, we were trying to do at least 2 towers a week.
And what components are being replaced? Are they replacing the blades? It's replacing the generators? What's the typical kind of O&M work that you're doing for those situations?
So on these particular projects, in essence, Minnesota, they were the old clipper towers. We were taking full rotor, dropping it down, then we were taking off the hood, then we were taking down the nacelle. Now with that particular tower, we were adding an adapter and we were installing the Vestas V100. So then we'd come back with the adapter. Then we would fly up the nacelle, and then the nacelle we tripped the hub, flew the nacelle and the hub together, and then we would do single stabs for the blades.
Wow. Okay. That's complicated. Is that the kind of repower? That basically switches suppliers, right? Clipper was GE. Just going from like a quote unquote GE to Vestas. Does that happen a lot? Do they change manufacturers in a repower?
Yeah. So you actually will see that a lot.
Really?
Yeah, we're on a site right now, and I call it a hybrid. But the actual tower components are all staying the same. We're just upgrading all the technology within the tower itself. So whether that be the batteries, blade bearings, yaw drives, that all is not typical in a repower because I'm used to taking blades down and taking nacelles down and replacing them, with different components. We've done Siemens 2.3s, we've done the GE 1.5s. So really just depends on, once again, the developer and what manufacturer we're going with in that regard.
That's good work. And your max capabilities as these wind turbines get bigger and bigger. And now we're talking about, well, on offshore, we're talking about 15 megawatt machines. What's some of the larger machines you've done onshore?
So we've done upwards of the 4.2, 4.5 megawatt platforms. To that statement, we actually had our first phone call for offshore work this week. I can't tell you how ecstatic I was. I know that's a big portion of what I want to do. I want to open up an offshore office as well and really driving the market in that regard, seeing what we need to do with unions and cranes and really educating myself to be a subject matter expert along the East Coast, but also, right? You have the Gulf and what's going on around the Houston port and what we can do here. That's something that I also will be looking into and have been looking into. But I just very humbled when I got the inquiry and we're jumping on a phone call and we're talking about, putting individuals out in 2023 for some offshore work. So it just really exciting and having that conversation.
Yeah, that's really cool. Obviously, 2023 is just going to be the start. Most things get really ramped up by 2025, so we have a little bit of time. But if you have people on the East Coast, you're going to have to learn to eat sort of Massachusetts, New York food, chowder and thin pizza.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if they got any good tacos out there.
Not so much, unfortunately. Yeah, we all have to all go to Texas for that good stuff. So there sounds like there's a lot of great things going on, and Rangel continues to grow. What's the future for Rangel Renewables?
Yeah, so like I said, we will one day be a global entity. We have a 10-year plan of just global growth and what that looks like for our staff. I know we've hit the milestone of being over 100 technicians in the field. I want to hit the milestone of having 250 employees with the goal of getting over 500 to 1,000. And that's having a strong foundation, having the right culture. It's very team, family oriented. It's not just individuals that I come in and I'm like, all right, I'd only see you from the 8 to 6, 9 to 6 time frame. It's we're still having lunches together. We're going to have dinners together. When we're out on the road, we're playing, cornholes and washers and, hanging out and going to the movies. But really the appreciation that I have for the technicians that do this day in and day out, but then also being on the road with them when we're chasing windows and they're needing assistance and wanting to be out there and show them like, we all came out the same way. I'm going to respect everyone the same way. I just want us to make sure that we're working hard in a safe manner so that we can execute and continue to have the growth and be provided the opportunities for future individuals in the industry that are going to be coupled with our training facility as well as we get cranes and where we're going to have laydown yards and continue the growth once again to provide a turnkey solution to our customers.
Josh, will you explain the training piece for a minute? So you're doing something really exciting here, and I want to make sure everybody's aware of it. So you're actually going to establish a training facility down in Houston.
Correct. We're going to do a training facility for GWO with the BST, the BTT, the ART, and then I want to couple that with what's going to be new to the industry, but GWO blade as well.
So that's a real big benefit if you're a technician within Rangel, as you have on-site training. You can get trained up pretty quick there. Right in Houston. That's a fantastic advantage.
And that's really the ultimate goal, but to be affordable, right? I want our staff to come in and they know that they're getting a great quality product. And then at that point, they're going out to the field. I don't want our technicians 5-6 months down the road saying, finally, after, getting training, I can start saving money. I want them to be able to get an affordable training, and then as they come out, be ready to go and excited about their field and learning about it and loving it, right? And that's really the type of staff that I want to continue to grow, to feed into. And once they get to the training facility, I get to see them. I get to say hello. I get to, hang out and joke with them a bit. But, all seriousness with what we're trying to do, I want them to be safe and really driving home the facet of this is why we're doing this, so that you guys can be properly trained and have all the certifications needed to get to a site and say, I have all my certifications. I'm ready to go up tower. I can save someone. God forbid something happens up tower. And we're going home at the end of the day. And that's really, truly what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, that's huge. It's a really good idea. And I'm sure you guys are going to do a great job of implementing it, and it's going to make a difference in the industry, and that's fantastic. Josh, thanks for being on the podcast. And if technicians are trying to reach out to connect with Rangel Renewables, or a site operator needs to get a hold of you, how do they reach Rangel Renewables?
Yeah, so of course, www.rangelrenewables.com, info@rangelrenewables.com, and of course, social media. I'm big on marketing and branding. We have our director of marketing here as well, and he knows my heart and how we want to reach out to, individuals, whether, there's green hand or seasoned in age, and a seasoned technician that maybe wants to do project management, or they want to get into a leadership role, but certainly can reach out to us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Those are some of our social media applications that they can reach out to us on.
Nice. And we'll put all those links in the show notes. So if you're interested, just go to the show notes. Josh, it's been great having you on the program. Thank you so much, and appreciate having you on Uptime.
I appreciate it, Alan. Look forward to continuing to see your success as well, and hope to see you guys down the road.
That's going to do it for this week's Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. Be sure to subscribe in the show notes below to the Uptime Tech News, our weekly newsletter, as well as Rosemary's YouTube channel, Engineering with Rosie. And we'll see you here next week on the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast.